lot of artists have a secret conception, they have like a project that they really want to give birth to, and then there's this concept like, oh, once I've finished that, like, okay, like I'll have achieved my sense of inner kind of validation that like, okay, I've kind of can put my flag in, and it's like, yeah, like I finished this, I did this. And I always say, okay, and then what? Like more than finishing a project or more than whatever recognition you think that you want, like at the core of your psychology is that you want to be in a living conversation with your work always. You want to be in that unfolding conversation, not one time, not two times, but for your whole life. And the same thing on the spiritual.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Free Radical podcast. Today, I've met dear Vaishnavi sister and artist, Lila Vrindavan Dasi. Lila Vrindavan is a visual artist, teacher, mentor, and yogini dedicated to uniting people through aesthetic experience. Her journey has been one of deep commitment to both artistry and spirituality. She spent 14 years immersed in Russian classical ballet before transitioning to visual arts, earning a BFA in drawing painting from Carnegie Mellon University. Growing up surrounded by the arts instilled in her a profound sense of wonder, leading her to explore mysticism, yoga philosophy, Ayurveda, and bhakti under master teachers for over a decade. Lila Vrindavan is the founder of Luminous Arts, a creative sanctuary where seekers and artists merge artistic expression with the sacred through community and education. She has led numerous global artist pilgrimages and now runs the online Creative Liberation Residency, guiding artists to deepen their creative practice and bring their projects to life. It was a very rich conversation, full plate, grandiose feast, talking with Lila Vrindavan on themes like, of course, art and creativity, play, the role of play in life, the role of improvisation, the nature of wonder, and how we can put all the things together to see life as art, to see spirituality as an artistic project, and so on and so forth. So we welcome you to the table, we welcome you to the feast. This is our Free Radical podcast, and to support it, please subscribe by clicking on the button and share if you found anything valuable in this conversation. Share your comments, share the episode, and keep the conversation going. So without further ado, dear friends, here is Lila Vrindavan. So, Lila Vrindavan, thanks so much for coming. My pleasure to have you here on the table.
Thank you for having me.
Big honor to have such a committed artist and Vaishnavi with us. And being an artist, so many directions we can go. But first of all, I like to ask you, like sometimes I like to ask some of our guests, like sometimes in our tradition, we have this thing called sankalpa, which translates as kind of setting an intention before starting a journey, an activity. So why we are here today, at least why you are here today? What do you hope to explore today?
Yeah, I love that. I also always start with sankalpa when I'm teaching with students.
Great.
Well, I think, like in the context of our trying to kind of come onto this call is, I think for the last few years, I've been very much in my kind of family role, mother role. And of course, I've been a lifelong artist, and I've been also teaching and practicing, bhakti and yoga for over the last decade. And then in the last years, I've really brought those two worlds together of having a kind of spiritual conception of creative practice and sharing how that comes together in a more kind of contemporary sense with artists who are interested in that intersection. So I feel like the sankalpa for this call is just kind of bringing that more into the world in new contexts, and just feeling blessed that you've invited me to share that, and coming outside of like, okay, this very absorbing mother role, and also allowing this role of myself as someone who has something to share in this regard to come forward. And I think I know what you're interested in very much so, I think is at the root of spiritual life, artist life, and also healing, I would say. this idea of wonder, this idea of catharsis, which I think is a really, really good kind of intention and entry point.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. I'm totally aligned with the Sankalpa. So we are in the same place about intentionality here. And it's all about intentionality. So it's so important to make that clear for us, for the audience that is watching now. So we'll try to explore, something around the lines of art and play, maybe wonder, creativity, catharsis. That's a powerful term. So let's begin with the classical one. Like, what is art? Because sometimes the word can refer to so many things, and sometimes it can apply to everything or to nothing, or some cultures don't even have a word for art. And not to say that there's no art, but some of them will think everything is art. So we cannot call something a specific art because we are taking out art from the other everything everywhere else. So I don't know. Is it art a modern construct? Is it art ontologically embedded in every atom of
Into
existence?
reality?
It's a fundamental aspect of a human being. Well, what is art for you? Of course, I'm not asking for
Oh my gosh, it's such a good
official definition, right?
Yeah, it's such a good and very challenging question, I think, because you're saying is like, okay, how could I put words to something that feels so broad and has culturally been expressed in so many different ways? And I've actually deeply considered this before because, I grew up in like a more, you would say, contemporary, modern conception of art. I grew up dancing, I grew up performing, and then I transitioned to go to art school in like the modern world. And I had deeply considered that actually, that a modern conception of what it means to be an artist is very different than like a traditional conception of what it means to be an artist. And even if you look, back in time, you look in Vedic culture, or you look in even like Platonic times, the artist was not seen as this like great personality that often now we see. The artist was more so an artisan, or either an artisan or a performer, both of which were seen as like more simple, right? They were seen as these like, okay, you can work with your hands, but it's not about the mind. You can have a very absorbing experience and proficiency with the way that you work with your hands, the way that you create crafts, but it's not necessarily that you're like a high intellectual, and similarly performers also were entertaining the kings or the royalty. And so again, there was that like lower status associated with it. So for me, that was always kind of strange when I like looked back at previous text, and I felt like, wait, like to me, that's not what an artist is. I think in modern conceptions, there's been a shift where an artist is also more of a thought leader. Like an artist is someone who, of course, is proficient in their craft, whatever that is, with their body, their hands, their words, but they also have an ability to kind of pierce through reality and express reality in a way that makes it seem novel, seem new, in a way that allows people to process grief, which is catharsis. That's kind of from like a historical lens, I could say. Where now I think in contemporary culture, it is that combination of the two. What you would say maybe like in Vedic culture, there is an element of like the Brahminical side of things, someone who is like deeply immersed in their thoughts, someone that's deeply immersed in their studies, lives a more hermited kind of life. So that's from a historical perspective, but I wonder,
what's hard for you now?
For me now,
which I totally appreciate that context. What's great and very useful for everyone.
Yeah.
So we go from the macro to the micro, from the universal to the personal today. And what's for you today? Not yesterday, not tomorrow, but in this particular moment, of your life.
I would say it's two things, and a lot of this has transformed for me over time of my own personal conception of what it means to be an artist in that role in the world, and to create art. I would say making art is like building worlds. It's a very more broad conception of kind of artistry, where you can envision a world that maybe has its own rules, and you can learn to bring people into that world, and hopefully with an intention of some sort of transformation or realization that the audience can have. So it's like you have your own deep internal world that you build, that you're obsessed with, whatever kind of practice that is. And for me, like, that's with my visual art.
Okay.
And you can learn how to invite people in to step into that world, to kind of build a universe for them that is not quite day-to-day life. It steps out of the confines of day-to-day life, and invites the audience to, like I said, process, have a perhaps sense of wonder, a sense of making what seems very close, the known, feel unknown.
Yeah.
Or perhaps vice versa, making the unknown feel known.
Yes, both beautiful. So it will be some sort of, like a word creator. I cannot avoid thinking about, in our tradition, about Brahma, right? Brahma is kind of an architect of a whole dimension of reality, whole universe, and somehow, we have the micro, all these different representations of the same principle. So why not? Yeah.
And even with that story, I actually remember specifically reading the Bhagavatam, and there's a verse where in that Lila, in that story of Lord Brahma, and how he comes into the world, and he has no idea who he is and what he's doing and why he's there. You know, and so he enters into his like deep contemplation, and he realizes that he's connected to God, and then he's instructed, okay, like, it's your duty to be the architect of the universe, it's your duty to create, and then it says, and in that duty, in creating, see me everywhere and everything in me. And so I remember specifically actually having such a beautiful moment reading that story, that Lila, and that verse, because it kind of like gave language to what I always felt internally, which was that creative practice is like, it kind of starts with like uncovering your identity and the essential questions of life, and inquiry, really. And hopefully that inquiry kind of catapults you into contemplation or meditation. You have some sort of realization that I've heard Carl Jung say, like, it's your moral obligation to share that you have been breathed upon. So you have some sort of moment of feeling that you've been breathed upon, and then you have the impetus to create something, and that very process of creating is like a remembrance process. So I've always considered that very much like a microcosmic or a macrocosmic story about what it feels like to create in a very intimate way.
Yeah, totally. I always, every time I read that section, I cannot avoid making a parallel. Okay, all this is depicting the journey of every soul. It's not about Brahma sitting in a lotus and that's it. Also that, but he is representing us in that moment of blossoming, like the lotus is there, the blossoming of consciousness, especially in this human form, and the existential crisis that it entails. And first he's looking outward for the answer to his crisis. Nothing happens. Then he goes back, sits, and here's this word that for me is so crucial, tapas, that the Bhagavatam mentions, tapas, which can be translated as fire also. So for me, it's very interesting. He hears fire and he goes inside. He enters the fire of introspection, which for me is very much what an artist is supposed to be doing. Like entering into the unknown, exploring what lies beyond the obvious, and articulating that realm, and making sense out of that unknown chaos, and putting some order to that, and bringing a product for us over here to get a glimpse of that, right? So in that sense, for me, it's very tied to everyone. In that sense, is called to be an artist in one way or another, I will say. And that comes from me another point that I would like to ask you, because can everyone be an artist in one way or another? Art is something limited to a painter or drawer, or you see art with these more universal lenses?
I think I have within me both conceptions, and as you were speaking, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is to conceptualize art is to, like you're saying, it kind of is that journey of every individual from inquiry and existential perplexion towards knowledge. And of course, that's the journey of every seeker or every pilgrim. And there's a very famous art critic or not critic, I guess you'd say, someone, he like basically writes a lot about Indian aesthetics, like classic Indian art. His name is Anand Kumar Swami. And he has this one quote that I love. He says, anyone who is not an artist in some field is merely an idler, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, everyone should have some craft, not necessarily within like what's traditionally known as an aesthetic craft, but everyone should have that relationship with their work that they are in a way like obsessed with. And I think from the lens of the Gita, it's like our work, and from the lens of what we're saying is, you know, through your work, through your duty, attempt to see me everywhere and everything in me. So in that way, it's like, yeah, you could see everyone's vocation as their art, as the process by which they can realize something if they enter deeply, right, into whatever practice, whatever work, whatever science, whatever tattva, you could say, like in Sanskrit, is their domain of expertise. The more they enter deeply into that, the more realization that they have, right? So it's like this beautiful relationship to the work that whatever it is that you're doing, that's your occupation.
Yeah, hearing you, I couldn't avoid thinking about, of course, as you referred to the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna's emphasis on performing your dharma, what sometimes could be related to the idea of karma yoga, engaging in your duty in the world. And somehow dharma could be in this context translated as vocation, as you said, not necessarily like forced labor that I hate, but something that fits my nature. So, or if I engage in from that place in my dharma, in my vocation, whatever I do as my work will be art, not only experience at art, and I can become an artist in my vocation, which can be translated as dharma. So I'm just redefining some of these terms, because sometimes we may end up using dharma or duty or in this certain way, and we may lose sight of okay, this can be art as well. This another way of talking about art.
Yeah, there's a famous book that kind of, when I was younger, catapulted me towards my spiritual path, and it's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's like a very famous 60s book, I believe, and it's about that specifically. It's about like just a man who travels with his son on a motorcycle across the US, and he's like a mechanic, and the whole thing is talking about how his work and relationship with his motorcycle, his relationship with being a mechanic, it's so absorbing and meditative that it's like an art form. So it kind of explores these questions. It's really interesting. But I want to touch on what you mentioned again, that question, like, can everyone be an artist? What do I think? And I said that I think I have both within me, like, and the way that this has helped, what has helped me to conceptualize this is to create a bit of a distinction between craft and creativity.
Okay.
I think creativity is the way that we fill up our perception. And I think anyone is capable of doing that, of how are you taking in the raw information from everything around you, from everything that's coming in through your senses, and translating it into meaning.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's creativity. It's like the work of the mind space. And then there's craft, which is the actual art form itself, which again can be independent, or rather what I'm trying to say is that it can be unique to each individual. Maybe it's not in the art realm specifically, and each person has their own craft, that is their skill set. So I think anyone has the capacity to engage deeply with creative thinking and to unlock a way of perceiving reality that is inherently creative, that feels like they're living creatively. And then whether or not that's expressed through like a traditional art form that I would deem like, oh yeah, this is directly good art, or it's expressed in a different way. I think anybody has the capacity to do that. And that kind of relationship with the mind space, in my opinion, that's where wonder comes in. And I think everyone wants wonder, or wants to have a perceptual world, have their eyes, like peeled back and experience a sense of renewed realization and discovery about the world around them and their relationship to it. And I think we're gifted with that opportunity despite whatever our vocation is.
Thank you for the clarification. And of course, you touch upon you invoke the magical word wonder, and I'm absolutely tempted to dive in there, but let's be patient. Let's for a moment just I like to make a connection, and it's totally in connection to wonder, so we are not going somewhere else. Spirituality, I mean, you have been talking about art. You used the word obsession a few times, you used the word absorption a few times, and all of this for me is very tied to the notion of spirituality and mystical experience and communion with God, because I mean the high point of the Bhagavad Gita, for example, is Krishna saying twice almost the same verse in the Bhagavad Gita, inviting Arjuna, and by extension each one of us, like, always think of me, which again you can translate as love me madly, become obsessed with me, and I will reciprocate accordingly, and all these types of idea of deep commitment to the other, to everything, because deep commitment to Krishna means deep commitment with everything, because everything is in connection to him. So I can of course sense from your words and knowing you that of course for you art is inseparable from the notion of spirituality and the divine, and connecting everything, as you referred to Brahma, and how he was instructed to perform his craft or his art or his duty and vocation, and in one way see God everything and everything in him. So where do I want to go with this? What comes to my mind now? Well, a book comes. You quoted a few books, so let's add to the bibliography of this podcast. I don't know if you saw this one, but this is a very interesting book by Stephen Nachmanovich. Maybe you know it. Okay, take note for you and everyone else in the world who is watching this. The book is called Free Play, and the subtitle is Improvisation in Life and Art.
Oh my God. Sounds just like...
He's a musician, he's an artist, and he's very deep into spirituality of all tradition. The book, actually, I read it before being with the Vaishnavas, and the book starts speaking about Krishna Lila. That's the beginning. I mean, speak about the concept of Lila as divine play in connection to free movement, free play, improvisation. So it's a beautiful book. And a few things that come to my mind in this connection in relation to spirituality and art. For example, he will say things like some wild one-liners that make you fall from your chair, like the most potent moments of creation occur when we stop trying to control the outcome. No? As simple as that, but like as powerful as that. Like getting out of your way as an artist, like putting your ego, if you want to use that word, aside, so that creativity can happen, or in your words, so we can meet meaning and purpose in reality. So I don't know. What do you think? What's your personal experience of that idea? For example, the most moments of creation occur when you stop trying to control the outcome.
Well, I want to touch on, I think, like central to what you're asking is what is the relationship between mystic practice and art. Clearly, in the Vaishnava tradition, the two are very closely linked. All of the spiritual realizations are expressed through art, whether that's song or literature / poetry or dance, and they're inherently linked. And I think this was an interesting point for me, because for a long time I had this very split identity, where I felt like, okay, I had my spiritual practice, which had a very specific way of articulating and expressing our relationship with the divine, right? Which is more personal, more narrative, you could say, if we're speaking in kind of creative terms. And then I had my own art practice, which was more modern, more abstract, I make these very intricate paper cuttings of hundreds of, but they're abstract, and they're not necessarily like, oh, this is a very clear depiction of this.
Where is Krishna there? Yeah.
Exactly. And so but for me, it was challenging because it was always such, like I said, like you're saying, such a deep absorption to create. And I would get into these stages of consciousness through repetition, through, sustained action and responsiveness. I think what you're saying is like when you do take yourself out of the driver's seat of your attempt to create, you start to feel like you're in a dialogue with your material, that it's alive, and you're,
Yeah.
in the words of even like yogic practice, right? Art, when you're fully focused, when you're fully absorbed, it's like the meditator, the meditation, and the object of meditation become one. So it's very similar feeling when you're in a union with your work or your
Yeah.
focus, as
Yeah.
in a creative sense. There is a very deep sense of meditation.
Yeah.
So I always felt that very deeply, but I felt like in my, like, I would tell people, oh yeah, I'm an artist, and they would say, oh, do you paint? Do you paint pictures of Krishna? And I would kind of like shrink down a little bit, because I think it's beautiful, but it's never been my particular mode of expression. And so to find the language to express what is going on, even if you're engaging in an art form that's not like directly related to, the stories and the Lilas that are familiar in our tradition, yeah, that is still a sadhana, that is still a spiritual practice. It's a mystic practice. And I've always felt like just that one line that you said, where, well, I forgot exactly what you said, but if you stop trying to be in control.
Yeah. The most potent moments of creation occur when we stop trying to control the outcome.
Yeah. And Julia Cameron, who's really famous, who wrote The Artist's Way. Yeah, one of her tenets or one of her prayers is, God, I will control the quantity, and you control the quality, right? So it's like, oh, I'm showing up, I'm making myself available for a relationship with my craft or a relationship with my material. And if I continue to explore that, and I can continue to pull on that, then the quality emerges, and the quality is not my doing. The quality is God's doing.
Yeah. That makes me think about, you just said showing up, and it makes me it may remind the definition of vulnerability that is being given by Brené Brown, another author I recommend publicly. And she will say vulnerability means to show up when we don't have any control over the outcome, basically. Right? Like, and an artist is showing up for in front of its craft, is whatever, and no control over it's a deep act of vulnerability, like, and the trust, of course, courageous act. By vulnerability, I mean courage, in the deepest way.
Yeah. And in my work, because I work a lot with artists, I observe that to be a very essential desire that artists have, but also a very central challenge, that they want to play, right? They want to enter improvisational kind of states of play with their creative work, but they consciously or unconsciously have kind of like built a cage for themselves in whether it's the type of work they create or how they create it, or how is this going to be perceived, like thinking about the external perception of their work before anyone is even out in the world. And it just keeps them from entering into a state of consciousness that is driven by experimentation and play, and yet it's what they want most, because that's where you feel the most alive.
And the moment you are able to enter into that state, I would say that's a warranty of success, no matter what the vox populi and the public opinion will say. That's not a yardstick for success, but the fact that you're able to enter into that space where, as you say, there is this dynamic merging between artist and work, and you become an instrument yourself. So and you mentioned the word play, and again, we are talking about improvisation, and I like always to relate to, again, art and spiritual life. And we, as in our tradition, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, our deity, if you will, is Krishna, and Krishna is God, and God, a Sanskrit word for the divine. Actually, the word divine comes from the Sanskrit deva, and the word deva comes from the root div, which in Sanskrit means play, to play. So that's very interesting, because how Sanskrit operates here. The word for God, deva, means he who plays. So the one who plays the most is the supreme personality of Godhead, we will say.
It's the greatest power play.
Exactly. Play requires power, I will say. Yeah. So I think that's a very important point. I mean, the whole concept of play in itself, because many times as adults, quote unquote, I put a few quotation marks in between, adults, we no longer connect with this reality of play. We think like, okay, babies are meant to play, children are meant to play. We are meant to do serious adult things, which do not entail play. But play is very serious in its own way if we understand the commitment of entering that space and allowing ourselves to improvise and be creative in a sacred way. That's topmost serious. So I think it's important that we redeem this word play and bring it back, especially for us in relation to whom our God is a player. I mean, he does nothing but play.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I've thought about this so much. Like, yeah, who in search of the God who dances, in search of the God who plays. And even like, because I have my own sankalpas when I teach, and also in my own practice, when I practice the sankalpas, it's certain qualities that I want to cultivate. And so one of my qualities, when I write the description of the quality, it says it's joyful, right? And the subtext of when it says joyful, it says, I have plenty of time to have dance parties and aimlessly wander and collect rocks, because for me, which sounds so silly, but it's like, for me, the sign that I'm thriving in my own nature is that I have protected time for aimless activity, for aimless wandering or play, collecting rocks, like these very simple acts of play are actually woven into my being, because that's where I thrive. And I think there's a huge challenge culturally. Even people who are artists or people who consider themselves creative in some way, there's a huge weight, I think, on their shoulders because they haven't like claimed a cultural responsibility for the protection of play. And they find themselves subtly, like it's a subconscious belief, maybe they don't give language to it, but it's a subconscious belief that they're irrelevant, right? Like I'm culturally irrelevant. I don't have a utilitarian function in day-to-day life, in material existence. And a lot of people either, they'll just begin to slowly sideline, like slowly, unconsciously, they start to sideline the part of themselves that wants to enter into just a pure improvisational play because it has no outcome in a kind of even a capitalist way, you could say, like in a production towards society. And so I think a huge healing moment for creatives and spiritualists too, like, because this is at the core of spiritual practice, is to claim that identity on a cultural level for yourself. Like, oh, I'm a protector of this realm of being, and also for oneself, to not be what I like to say, like chronically busy. You're not chronically busy and out, constantly taking care of keeping things in order, the emails and your children's things and walking the dog and cooking the meals and slowly just erasing the part of your psyche that needs play. And so there's a beautiful, again, another book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. And such a classic. She has another one of those, like, just so many one-liners that are so, that's like pierced through the heart. And she says, like staking a claim around your soul life, and I think especially, at least in my stage of life, where it is like the stage of growing out in the world and, growing a home and growing a family and growing responsibilities, like you have to stake a claim around your soul life, your playful life, your deep life, or else it will just disappear. And no one can do it except for you to decide that it's essential.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you. I couldn't avoid thinking about my own case. I don't want to make it too self-referential because sometimes it ends being too self-reverential, as some friends will say. But I recall before becoming a monk, before connecting with the Bhakti tradition. I was a musician myself. I was a lot into
Oh, I
art.
didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I had two bands. I was playing drums in one, guitar in another. I was doing painting. I
Wow.
wrote some poetry for some publications at that time. So I was a lot into art, and hopefully I'm still a lot into art. I don't want to say. And then I became a monk.
Yeah. But it happens to so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
people.
And what I'm thinking is that I felt a little bit what you were mentioning, how in a productive industrialist society, the artist generally, you have to reclaim that place in the culture. And that affected me, and because I wanted just to live my life doing that, and there was not that much encouragement on a social level, like, yes, you will be able to 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 attain glory through your craft, so to say. And then I became a monk, which in one sense is even less popular than being an artist, and it is even seen as even less productive for society.
Oh,
A monk literally does not produce in
you
one
just
sense.
beg. You just ask people for things
Yeah,
on an external level.
yeah. So I could now, through hearing your words, which are articulating that struggle at that time, I can see myself years ago, decades ago, like trying to, as you were saying, like assert my place in the world, in culture, in society, and say, okay, I have something to contribute here, have a place, I have an identity, and it's, yeah, even if it's not fully accepted or appreciated by the majority, I found my place in the world, and even I can integrate being an artist and a monastic even on that level. So thank
Hmm.
you for helping me make further sense of my past.
Yeah, I think that happens with a lot of people who go down into a serious relationship with their spiritual life, is that
Hmm.
they kind of dissociate from if they had a previous creative identity. They
Hmm.
and this isn't everyone, and I think obviously recently there's a lot more support for people coming in and becoming integrated with all their different identities on the spiritual path. But I think it's quite natural that a lot of practicing sadhakas
Hmm.
become very absorbed and unconsciously rigid when it comes
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
their previous life, because it is, of course, associated with certain relationships or certain ways of being in the world that could be exploitative or very like hedonist, and not necessarily, but there's kind of this
Yeah.
association like, oh, the creative life is, it's very wild, it's untamed, it doesn't live towards these like grand ideals, spiritual ideals, and so like, oh, better I just, learn how to play mridanga in the kirtan, and that'll be enough.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, but then you end up realizing, oh, I'm worshiping a guy in the altar that is full of all the 64 main arts described in the scripture. And the other day I was reading Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, 64 qualities of Krishna, and the number, I think 13, was Pratibambita, which Rupa Goswami translates as possessed with creativity.
hmm,
And then he explains that further, saying like that means immediate noble manifestation of ideas. So we are worshiping such a person, and we are
yeah.
worshiping therefore such an ideal, and we have to enter into that space of, again, of play and improvisation. And I will say also there to, how to say, to navigate failure and mistake, because sometimes in art there may be so much fear of, again, other people's opinion and reaction, which may be tied to me being a failure, to not me not being good enough, and we can go a lot into that direction of having proper self-validation. But also for me, that it's so important, the point of, okay, I'm trying to live a life of included play and improvisation in my life as an artist, as a monk, as a spiritualist, and that includes the potential of mistakes and failure, but that includes the potential of integrated mistakes and failure as part of the craft itself, so
Hmm.
they no longer become a mistake. No, and I cannot avoid thinking of a famous example, since we're talking about improvisation and play, from the jazz world, which is of course the music genre, which is so much about improvisation. I never
Hmm.
went so much into jazz. I went a lot into Indian classical music before becoming a Vaishnav. So,
Hmm.
which is a lot about
It
improvisation.
is
And
very similar in some
yeah,
ways structurally.
yeah, it has some minimum structure, because of course improvisation, again, as you were saying, some people think becoming an artist is you are crazy and wild to the extreme. But no, there is some perimeter and parameter, like with any play. Like if I will don't know, want to play chess with you. There are some rules to follow, but in
Mm-hmm.
the context of those rules, we can just flow, enter flow state, as it will be called. So same with improvisation. There are some parameters of rhythm and melody, so to say, and in that context, there is place to explore. And there's potential for making mistakes, and there's potential to including those mistakes as part of the craft. And going back to the jazz world, there is this famous anecdote from Herbie Hancock. He's a piano player. I don't recall if he's still alive. He will play with Miles Davis and other famous jazz musicians, and he was sharing a story very nicely. He was playing with Miles Davis, so he's playing his piano, Miles Davis playing some wind instrument. And at one point, Herbie Hancock on his piano hits the wrong note, right? Like terribly wrong note. So he becomes like terrified about like, I have ruined the whole thing. No, because they were playing the whole band, improvising, everything went smoothly, and he played the wrong note. And then what Miles Davis did is he took that wrong quote unquote note and he started to create a whole new melodic pattern based on that wrong note. So he
Mm-hmm.
make the wrong note correct. No, and then he will count the famous quote that he said, like, when you hit the wrong note, it's the next note that makes it good or bad.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah, and it takes an expert though, like you're
Yes.
saying, is when it
Yes.
comes to the structure. Oh, it takes an expert to know exactly how to dance with
Mm.
that improvisation, because they
Yeah.
know, oh, if you're an expert, they can expertly glide through
Yeah.
all the realms
Yeah.
of musical improvisation. And what that reminds me of similarly is like, I've never done it, but in improv, when you take an improv class, like I think the number one main tenet is yes and. So someone comes in and you start a story, you start doing some sort of vignette, and someone says, okay, like I don't know, let's say a bird appeared out of a great golden egg, and then the next person says, oh yes, and and you take the
Even
anomaly, or you take the strange thing and you almost merge it into or similarly in writing, there's magical realism. Magical realism is like when you take fantastical elements within a story, but the way that you write about them is that they appear to be real or normal.
Yeah.
It's very matter of fact. So it's similar. It's like to be an improvisation is to just say, okay, yes, and here's the next thing. And it's such a like beautiful tenet of play. Another thing that I'm thinking of, because you mentioned vulnerability and fear of failure and improvisation, I think really good art and a really good, I don't know how to say it, like the types of people that I aspire to be around, they have two seemingly paradoxical qualities that make both good art or good expression and also good humans, in my opinion, right? So firstly is their ability to like be situated in what I like to call come home to the self, right? So okay, they have like a realized understanding of the part of themselves that is just eternal, that is beautiful, that's filled with filled with value. It's a wellspring, it's a generative part of their being, which is consciousness, which is the soul. And they're like have a realized conception of that. And that's on one side. And then on the other side is they have embraced their vulnerable humanity. And they can tell, and that's the story of the pilgrim. That's the pilgrim's journey is, okay, how am I aspiring towards beatitude while also fully taking into account my beautiful brokenness that is equally, I wouldn't even say that it's less than, it's equally part of my identity. And I think what happens often when we're pursuing something great and something beautiful, we become so obsessed with that we start to dissociate from our broken humanity. But when we read the stories of the Bhagavatam, when we read the prayers of all of the saints that we ourselves recite, like they're saying that, they're like, I feel wretched. I feel like broken. I have made mistakes. I'm so self-absorbed, and yet like, please, will you please accept me? And these are like the greatest kind of personalities of our culture, our spiritual tradition. And similarly, I had a friend of mine who's a really amazing writer. She's a screenwriter, and she just finished her first feature film, and she is really, really interested in like narrative storytelling. And she told me this once where she said, every story has already been told, right? And this is when you look into like Joseph Campbell's work about archetypes and storytelling, and when you look at all the stories of all traditions, there's every single permutation of a story that could be told. It already exists in history. But if you take a universal idea or a universal principle and you imbue it with something that's genuinely yours and genuinely vulnerable, of your own human experience, that combination is like just the secret sauce, you could say. It's like the secret formula for something that's truly moving and truly transformative. Because we don't want to aspire towards people who are just perfect. Even, like sometimes
does it exist at all?
Does it exist? It's like, but there's a secret aspiration for perfection. And even sometimes, for example, like with the Bhagavad Gita, it's like, and often it's said, okay, Krishna was on the battlefield, but Arjuna, he's kind of like you, but he's not really like you. Like, he's actually perfect, but he just, for the sake of the story and for the sake of the Gita being spoken, he was, put kind of into this illusion that he's in this great suffering so that Krishna could speak the Bhagavad Gita to him. But for me, that was always a challenge, because I was like, well, wait, if he's already perfect, how is it going to help me, who's definitely not perfect? Right? So even like with all the great stories that we look up to, Arjuna, for me, it helps me to see that, no, he was truly like experiencing real subjective suffering of his vulnerable humanity.
Yeah, that's very important. And we have talked many times about that I remember with Jai Jagannath and other friends, about how sometimes we over-idealized the great personalities, meaning every guru, every acharya, every saint has been eternally liberated and enlightened. And whenever they seem to be showing some relative brokenness, it's just a Leela for you to identify, but actually they are somewhere else. So actually that's totally discouraging, because we don't have any role model to follow, because all of them are already perfect. And as you say, we are not. So I don't have any realistic, I cannot identify in a realistic way with anyone, because actually they are all playing roles for me instead of depicting something true with which I can identify. So I totally appreciate the point of that, and of integrated our, if you will, eternal side and our human side. Because again, we happen to be worshiping a God who is not only a dancer and a musician and an artist, consummated artist, he happens to be fully human and fully divine. Krishna's Lila is Nara Lila, which means human Lila. So we have to do something with our humanity, and that something is not throwing that away in the pursuit of transcendence, but proper integration of that. And as you say, brokenness is such an entry point for divinity, for eternal life. It's not something that needs to be done away with. And for me, perfection, since you mentioned perfection, I personally, I do not believe in perfection. At least not in perfection as a fixed maximum. Because sometimes the idea of perfection is so imperfect, right? I mean, so suffocating. Perfection is this, and that's it. Once, if you are not there, it's so discouraging, because you are never there. But if you get there, it seems like, okay, you reach there and there's no longer anything else you can be attained further, because you are perfect. So I don't know both of the two sides of the coin is not very fitting for me. So I like to think of, a perfection, if you will, as a constant state of further unfolding. And that's how the scripture referred to Krishna. I don't know. Krishna in Mathura is perfect, in Dwarka is perfect, Mathura is more perfect, in Vrindavan is most perfect. And then every moment he's becoming more beautiful. So there's always a constant, ever-evolving unfolding of reality. And I think, okay, that I can take as perfection, and ever-evolving.
And I know that you like also the terminology of the game. So it's like that. It's like game theory, right? Game theory is about not a finished point in the game, like, okay, I won or I lost, but the success of the game is the extent to which you continue to engage with the game. And so it's the same thing. Like, even kind of coming back to like the work that I do with artists, like a lot of artists have a secret conception, you know, they have like a project that they really want to give birth to, you know, and then there's this concept like, oh, once I've finished that, like, okay, like I'll have achieved my sense of inner kind of validation that, like, okay, I've kind of can put my flag in, and it's like, yeah, like I finished this, I did this. And I always say, okay, and then what? Like more than finishing a project or more than whatever recognition you think that you want, like at the core of your psychology is that you want to be in a living conversation with your work always.
Yes.
You want to be in that unfolding conversation, not one time, not two times, but for your whole life. And the same thing on
for eternity, at least for us.
eternity.
Yeah, because our idea in eternity is Lila, and Lila is play, and we hear about this eternal play of Krishna doing different things throughout the day periods, and it seems to be almost not always the same, but very similar things he does at different days, times of the day, eternally. So if the whole Lila, if the whole play is not unfolding ever new in an ongoing way, that feels like hell, right? To go to a place that you will be doing almost the same thing for eternity is like, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Unless it is a constant, ever fresh, ever new experience, and it's never the same, right? So yeah, that's very important. Lila Vrindavan, you mentioned the word a few minutes ago, and I will catch that to go to a desired place I would like to visit. Use the word secret sauce. That's a good. I immediately thought about the word rasa. No,
Yes.
Secret sauce rasa, because rasa can mean juice and flow and sauce. And of course, we were talking about wonder a few minutes ago. So I like to put these two together, wonder and secret sauce, because there's one famous one-liner in our tradition which says rasa sar chamatkar, which basically means the essence of rasa, of this sacred juice, is chamatkar, which means wonder. So the essence of the highest love, rasa, or of the secret juice of life, is wonder. And because of that, there is this beautiful play of words that they make in India. They say chamatkar a namaskar, which means to chamatkar, to awe and wonder, I offer my namaskar. No? True astonishment deserves our deepest reverence, so to say. And of course, this is not only limited to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I remember hearing from Socrates things like wisdom begins with wonder. In Buddhism, they have this Shoshin concept, which means remaining an eternal student, always learning, always opening. Einstein has a very beautiful quote about wonder, and he says, for him who this emotion is not real, that person is as if dead, basically. No? And so many other things. Jesus talking about remain like a child forever. I cannot just connect all of the things. So I don't know, and I can of course connect wonder with creativity, because for me a creative mind stays in a state of wonder, must stay in a state of wonder, and a rigid mind maybe will seek certainty instead of wonder. So yeah, what any thoughts you have on that? I mean, a lot of thoughts for sure. So whatever comes in this moment.
Yeah. Well, I think that relationship with wonder and rasa, wonder is like I guess you could say deepen, or like the catapult for remembrance across many different traditions or across many different types of feelings, right? And that's what I guess when I'm thinking about this, like, how do I really pin this down into a single word? Well, wonder, it's astonishment. Yeah, it is astonishment. But I feel like there's so many different emotional landscapes that we can have with wonder. And for me, often wonder is very much associated with nostalgia also. Like, I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but one thing that I like to practice is what I call the anatomy of wonder. And it's like, how can you track back to some of the most, and they don't even necessarily have to be like the most pivotal or the most meaningful on an external level. Like, yeah, of course you could say, oh, the most meaningful wonder-filled moment was when I met my teacher, and like, and that catapulted me on my journey. And of course, yeah, okay, that moment was so important. But also there's many micro moments of wonder that we have in our life that often we don't even kind of recognize in the moment. So when I kind of go through this exercise with the anatomy of wonder, often what I'll do is I'll invite myself, or I'll invite people to go into the recesses of their consciousness and allow a memory to kind of like a memory that feels positive, a memory that feels wonder filled, to kind of arise from below without trying to kind of decide, okay, this is like this one specific magical moment that I want to unpack. So even for me, I was doing this practice and I had this memory of watching TV on the couch with my mom as a kid. Like, okay, which sounds so mundane, so basic.
It's fine.
And she just is stroking my head. And so then I'm like, okay, well, let me take an interest in that. Why did that come up? It seems so simple. And so what I'll do is I'll track it into like a series of questions that I have about what is it that composed this particular experience, which is very similar, like in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and a conception of rasa. Oh, it's all these different micro components that come together. Oh, it's the quality of the wind in the fall and the quality of the flowers as they're starting to bloom in the spring that invite a certain rasa or a certain lila to basically be invoked, right? There's all these sensory impressions from the outer world that begin to facilitate us an expression of a certain emotion. So I'll basically start to kind of unpack that. What were all the sensory triggers of that experience? What were the environmental triggers? Like, who was I with, and why did it feel so safe and beautiful to be in this moment? And how old was I, and what does this age represent in the journey of my like becoming? So anyway, so I like to kind of track back. And for example, in this very mundane memory of watching TV with my mom, it's like the feeling of togetherness that is very, what's the word? Like a very natural sense of togetherness that doesn't require performance, or it doesn't require that we are in like an active entertainment with one another, which when I think to my adult life, I'm like, well, I feel like I'm missing that a little bit. Like, what is it that's missing from my adult life where relationships can be transactional or very forced? If I were to track back and create an anatomy or a description for how it feels to be with someone in a way that is very natural and easeful, and we can just coexist in the same space together, like, how would I begin to unpack that? And for me, those very micro moments are equally kind of wonder-filled as our very astonishing moments, like, you know, in the Bhagavad Gita when Arjuna is taking darshan of the universal. Like, I mean, that's very astonishing.
From the couch to the Vishwaroop. Wonder all along.
Wonder all along.
Thank
you. I know that was a bit of a...
Sorry?
I know that was a bit of a detour, but that was just what was coming to mind because it's been very alive.
It was not a bit of, it was not a detour, and I appreciate that I was thinking about asking you some practical practices or steps to invoke wonder, so you just did that, so thank you. And I appreciate that you went to a very quote-unquote ordinary situation, which I wouldn't call it ordinary, because again, you are extracting wonder, and you're extracting togetherness and belonging. So for me also, that's a good prompt that shows, okay, even if in the so-called ordinary there is so much extraordinariness embedded there, we just have to approach it with the right eyes, the right ears, and draw wonder from that. So everything is wonderful. It's full of wonder. And you say wonder field, and I think, okay, why we use the word wonderful so much, but it should be tied to all this as well.
It can feel easier often to look back in time. I found, like I was mentioning, nostalgia, it can sometimes feel easier to look back in time, and we have almost like a romance of maybe different eras of our life where different parts of ourselves were more alive, more expressed, and then maybe they disappeared or went under the water. And so a practice that I like to do if I'm feeling a sense of mundaneness right now, is I simply like do the same exact exercise, except I envision that I'm a future self that's looking back to this very moment in time and realizing, oh, this is so, the 80-year-old self of me who is dreaming to go back to when I was, in my late 20s, and I was just starting a family, and we just bought our first home, and the quality of the light in that home was so special. Like you can almost track yourself forward to be a future version of yourself that can look back right now and start to decode, oh, what are all the elements that are very simple but making my own life right now so wonder filled.
Thank you. We have a quote here in Argentina. Of course, I won't say it in Spanish. It won't make any sense to anyone basically here. But basically it says that every past time, not past time like Lila, but time from the past, feels like it was better than whatever is happening in the present. And making it longer is shorter. So I appreciate your way of dealing with that in your own mind and making that play. Okay, let's travel to the future and look at the present as if it were the past. So it's okay if it works, and if it evokes, again, if it accesses some form of a deep enough or wonder, that's legal, right? That's valid.
Legal.
Yeah.
What about you? What is your, because clearly it's something that you've spent a lot of time with, and you brought up that relationship between wonder and rasa. What would you add to that topic? Or
yeah, well, thank you for the question. For me at present, I will say wonder moments. There are different places and times where I experience wonder. Of course, big part of my current expression of my vocation, let's say through writing and through talking and speaking like we're doing now. But sometimes I'm not having a conversation. I'm mostly giving a lecture, which I try to conceive also as some form of dialogue, so it doesn't end up being me giving a monologue, which is so sad for everyone, including me. And sometimes the wonder comes when I realize that clearly, because sometimes I'm talking and I end up saying something which I'm like, whoa, that was great. That was like, such a cool concept. And very quickly, but it was not me. Right? It's very clear it was not me. So I'm really in that moment of, it's a form again of absorption. It's a form of being instrumentalized, and you end up articulating certain things that, like again, extracting some meaning out of the unknown. So that feels so humbling. That means feels so. I mean, it's a moment when you can transcend like your own sense of self, and I'm not talking about some form of impersonal merging, but just you realize who you are in connection with what is bigger than yourself, and it's not that you are so much in self-centered basically. So that it's not only a relief, but it's also again a big moment of wonder for me. And writing is similar. Sometimes writing, some things starts to happen, and then I reread that and I like, did I write that? Of course, sometimes I say, did I write that? That's crap. And sometimes I didn't write that. That's great. And that was not me, so to say.
It's like it's in that state of, like we were mentioning, of where the object of meditation, the meditation and the meditator, or in your case, the writer and the process of writing, you enter into such a state of absorption that it's almost like, there is an erasure of one's ego in that beautiful process. And so I've considered that too, like, because I've had that very similar experience looking back at art, that I made. Wow, did I make that? I don't, because it's like such a level of focus and absorption and concentration where something emerges, and the ego for a momentary moment is more submerged. I look back, wow, that came through. That came through me. One addition that I would love to make to this conversation about wonder is that I think wonder it's very intricately and intimately connected with remembrance, right? And remembrance is like, it's a really interesting word because it's not the same as like a novel realization. Remembrance is almost like there's remembrance and forgetfulness, right? So forgetfulness is just the absence of the realization of the thread that is kind of tying reality together at all times. And I think this is maybe a little bit vague, but So in our moments of wonder, I think we have the experience like, oh, wow, something very mysterious, something very mystical has been going on all along.
Mm-hmm.
It's, oh, this secret hidden realm of the living unfolding of consciousness, like it's always going on. And in those moments of wonder, it's just an opportunity to return to what is actually happening in reality, like as a form of remembrance and a realization. And then also, oh, this is always accessible to me.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of friends in my own community and Sangha are really turning towards prayer. Tamal, for example, and Vera, who studied with him deeply. And I think prayer is very deeply connected with that practice of remembrance, because it doesn't require like some great austerity, or it doesn't require some great character. It's like, oh, I can simply sit down and pray, and within moments I can start to feel, oh, there is an undercurrent to whatever it is, whether it's my challenges or my triumphs, whatever it is. Oh, there's an undercurrent of what is happening on a psycho-emotional level, and then even deeper on like a transcendental level.
Yeah.
So I think wonder is very connected with that.
Yeah. And I was just going to tell you, because I mentioned examples of me talking and writing, and the third thing that naturally came was going to be prayer. And again, prayer, just to clarify, doesn't mean necessarily chanting your rounds, so to say, which of course should be done in a prayerful way, but you can just be sitting in silence, and that's prayer. It's a way of, as long as you were saying, you are willing to enter into that accessing of that always available realm, with openness and vulnerability and willingness to contact what lies beyond your comfort zone, if you want to put it that way, but trusting the unfolding that comes from that side. That's prayer. I mean, it doesn't need to be taken a particular form or shape or be branded in this or that way. So yeah, thank you for ending that on that high note on prayer and connection to wonder. We could go on for eons, Lila Vrindavan, but we have also some other commitments during our day, both of us, and hopefully we can continue discovering wonder in those. But I'd like to conclude, if you allow me, for a few more minutes. For the last few episodes, I've kind of inaugurated a small section at the end of our conversation with some short back and forth. I remember always Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he had his conversation with Ramananda Roy in South India, they have this back and forth, and at the end it ended up with a few short questions and short answers back and forth, to somehow try to invoke those dynamics, with a few questions, short ones, and inviting you for also similar short answer. It may be a little bit in our tradition. We have this saying madhurena samapayat. Sometimes says like end with something sweet, whether it's when you're eating or something, even talking, even a lecture, you end up on some sweet note. I kind of adjusted that ushnena samapayat, which is end up with something more like spicy, and spicy in the good sense of the term, like a little bit. You will see what I mean by this.
So, I'm frightened and ready.
Great. That's what I was looking forward. That's the ideal combination. So, number one, what's one creative risk you took that changed everything for you? Now you understand what I meant by spicy.
Well, it's interesting because I wouldn't think of myself as a huge risk taker creatively. I think a recent one is changing my idea of being an artist as something very fixed, to conceiving of myself as someone who builds worlds, and that being my superpower. But that in that transition felt very bold and risky. Like, okay, I can design a world, and that can come across many different media, not necessarily the exclusive media that I'm trained in. Yeah, but when I say it outside, it doesn't sound like a risk, but it feels like one.
I totally get it. Thank you. Second one, if surrender had a color, what will it be?
Periwinkle?
Which one again, sorry?
Periwinkle. It's like a lilac, very like electric lilac blue.
Okay, wow. I never heard about that one. I will look it for it after our recording for sure. Thank you. Also, as we say before, third one, Krishna is possessed with creativity. So, what's the most creative thing uh, that he has ever done in your life?
Hmm. The most creative thing is I feel blessed with, I think, the mind that he gave me and that he allows me to go into infinite, what feels like infinite pathways of connection, realization, study, where I can, if I'm focused, I feel like I have this sense of like reality opening up in a very subjective way. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty creative invention.
Cheers to Krishna for that one. Okay, great. So, what's one number four? What's one thing every artist needs to unlearn, in your opinion?
Hmm. I mean, I think everything that we spoke about. What artists need to unlearn
One
is,
thing, yeah, one thing every artist needs to unlearn, at least at some point of their journey. Yeah.
yeah, I think artists need to unlearn that any of their value comes from outside of themselves. Which the positive expression would be that your value comes in your absorption in your process for always first and foremost.
Thank you. The fifth one, I'm invoking the figure of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We didn't go there today, but I like to think of Mahaprabhu as the god of curiosity because he's Krishna exploring the heart of Radha and wanting to taste those depths. And curiosity is so much tied to art and exploration. So I'm just qualifying my question by just mentioning that briefly. So that said, if Mahaprabhu were an artist in today's world, what kind of art will he make?
Oh, I mean, art that probably no one would understand. I think he would be a total mad person.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would be creating songs, invoking songs that nobody could understand the connection of what they had to do with his great spiritual spiritual greatness. They would have to be very attuned to understand the depth of what he's doing. But maybe externally it would be either perceived as very mundane or it would be perceived as absurd.
Nice. Yeah, that reminds me when Mahaprabhu himself, 500 years ago, was singing a mundane, quote unquote, love song in the Rath Yatra. Nobody
Mhm.
understood what was going on. So probably that may continue to happen now.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Okay. Okay. So, number six, describe your artistic process in one word.
Hmm. This is
Sorry. Sorry
gonna
for that.
sound very like psychedelic, but I would
I'm fine.
say
I'm fine with psychedelic. No problem.
I would say like vibrating,
Okay.
like alive.
Beautiful. Thank you. Number seven, four more. Number seven, what's more sacred, perfection or imperfection?
There is an obvious answer, I feel.
Yeah, yeah. I want to make one easy for you at least.
Okay, imperfection. Imperfection in pursuit of perfection. That's my
Okay,
answer.
beautiful. What's number eight? What's one Gaudiya Vaishnav concept that every artist, in your opinion, should learn from?
Rasa.
Beautiful.
Rasa is everything.
Hmm. Hmm. Number nine. What's one thing about this spiritual path that still surprises you? Of course, there will be many, but just there's one thing you can mention.
That return is always available and possible, despite how internally distant you might feel.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you. That gives hope for sure to many.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last one, if your life were a painting, Lila Vrindavan, what title will it have?
What title will it have?
Yeah.
The Quirky Pilgrim.
Okay. Great. Thank you. You survived it. Congratulations. You did it. Very beautiful.
Oh, I
You're,
hope
you're
it's not.
sending your award to your address in a few weeks, so no problem. Thank you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
And just to close, to wrap up our episode, Lila, if you could offer our listeners, I don't know, one final spark, whether it's a, I don't know, bold challenge or a fresh perspective or giving hope, creative invitation, I don't know, what will it be? How can they step into their own wonder, into their own surrender to improvisation, live more artfully, whatever you may like to share in those lines.
What comes to mind is what I mentioned around the most surprising thing in my spiritual life is that return is always possible. It reminds me of a quote that I love by Rumi, where he says, even if you have broken your vow 1,000 times, still come, and yet again come. And I think when it comes to the artist's path and the pilgrim's path, it is like this constant, beautiful, consistent returning and allowance and permission to return to that part of oneself and to know, oh, this part of myself is valuable. This part of myself is required for me to experience a sense of wholeness, and deserves space, deserves to have like those stakes around that soul life claimed, whatever that looks like in a practical sense, but to consciously and actively decide that what appears to be very externally irrelevant is actually extremely relevant for like for the development of your psyche, for the development also of your spiritual life and your creative depth. So whether that's making a flower outfit for the deities, which has absolutely zero logic, and requires 30 women's hands for 4 days straight, that's required. It's beautiful and it's required. And so whatever your version of that is, that commitment to an absurd beauty, it deserves space and to be expressed. And that when we engage actively in our creative life, it actually feels like a renaissance of our being, in my opinion, right? Because creative energy, Shakti energy, it's the energy of life, more life. And it means that there's a certain level of safety and there's a certain level of luxury to engage with the parts of life that are not only survival, but they're thriving. So when we're engaging with our creative life, when we're engaging with our spiritual life in a creative way, in an improvisational way, it actually gives that like illuminated sense of thriving and eros, I guess you could say, like within life. And so it's no small thing, because I think to settle for a life that feels flat and disenchanted is a real shame.
Thank you. Thank you for empowering and blessing us with your words and with your life example and with your living art project at every step. Every step is a dance, every word is a song. Thank you for giving us a glimpse of that magical world in the here and now. Our pleasure to have you here, Lila Vrindavan.
Thank
Deep
you.
gratitude.